ship was designed to fight in one domain at a time. This was not a limitation the designers had overlooked. It was an honest reflection of how naval warfare had worked for the preceding 70 years. Air threats came from the air. Surface threats came from the surface. Underwater threats came from below. The engagement sequences were sequential, or at worst overlapping by a single threat category. A destroyer defending against anti-ship missiles while simultaneously managing fast attack craft was a complex, documented problem with tested doctrine and practice procedures. The Arleigh Burke class had been built to solve it. What it had not been designed to solve was a simultaneous, coordinated engagement across all three physical domains at once. Three separate weapons inventories serving three separate engagement requirements that could not supplement each other, each domain demanding the system's full attention at the same time. The destroyer is operating in the Persian Gulf, 68 nautical miles east of Bahrain, conducting an independent patrol in the central Gulf shipping lanes. The time is 1:47 a.m. The surface picture is moderately dense, commercial traffic on the established shipping routes, a few contacts in the traffic separation scheme to the north, nothing operationally significant. The undersea picture, as monitored by the AN/SQS-53C hull sonar, is acoustically cluttered but clean. Biological returns, shipping noise, no contacts. The air picture is quiet. All three domain pictures change at 1:47 a.m. The change in the air picture came first by approximately 4 seconds. The SPY-6 radar resolved 30 contacts on bearing 016 to 034, range 62 to 69 kilometers, altitude 400 meters and descending, speed 190 kilometers per hour, shade 136 profile one-way attack platforms, GPS and terminal electro-optical guidance, 40-kilogram fragmentation warheads, 3 subgroups of approximately 10 platforms each on slightly divergent bearings, consistent with a launch from the Iranian coast, 40 to 50 kilometers inland. 4 seconds after the air contacts appeared, the surface search picture produced 20 contacts on bearing 042 to 055, range 18 to 24 kilometers. 20 rigid hull unmanned surface vehicles at 28 to 32 knots, emerging from behind a commercial vessel that had been in the traffic separation lane for the past 2 hours and had just altered course to open the bearing arc. The USVs had been using the commercial vessel as radar cover for their approach, and 4 seconds after the surface contacts appeared, 8 seconds after the air contacts had first resolved, the AN/SQS-53C produced 8 contact candidates, bearing 290 to 310, range 7 to 11 kilometers, depth 22 to 38 meters, speed 8 to 11 knots. Autonomous underwater vehicles, small, slow electric propulsion, closing on direct approach vectors, 30 airborne, 20 surface, 8 underwater. The TAO read the 3 pictures simultaneously and understood in under 3 seconds what he was looking at and why it was different from everything that had preceded it in the engagement library. The air threat required SM-6, SM-2, ESSM, RAM, and CIWS. The surface threat required the 5-inch gun, CIWS in surface mode, and RAM. The underwater threat required VLAS, ROC, and Mark 32 torpedoes. None could support any other domain. ASROC could not engage a drone. The gun could not engage a UUV. The SM-6 had no reliable surface mode. The CIWS could rotate between air and surface, but not simultaneously. 3 separate engagements, each calibrated to the weapon that defended against it. All 3 launched at once. TOW, all domain threat simultaneous. ASW immediate, surface threat priority gun, air threat missile engagement, all systems weapons free by domain. ASROC on the UUV picture, gun to surface, missiles on the air threat, go. The word go was spoken at 1:47 a.m. plus 31 seconds. From that moment, the ship was fighting 3 separate engagements with 3 separate teams in 3 separate weapon control spaces, and none of them could slow down to wait for the others. Running count, 1:48 a.m., second 60, air 30 UAV contacts bearing 016 to 034, range 61 kilometers, altitude 350 meters, 190 kilometers per hour. Surface, 20 USV contacts, bearing 042 to 055, range 21 kilometers, 29 knots. Underwater, 8 UUV contacts, bearing 290 to 310, range 8 to 11 kilometers, depth 22 to 38 meters, speed 9 knots. SM6 8, SM2 24, ESSM 32, RAM 21, CIWS fore and aft 100%. 5-inch gun, 600 rounds, VL-ASROC 8, MK32 MK54-6, SH-60R hangar preparing launch, cost $0. The ASW fight was the most time-critical. The underwater contacts were already at 8 to 11 kilometers. At 9 knots, they would reach the hull in approximately 50 to 65 minutes, the longest timeline of the 3 threats, but the one with the most constrained response capability. The ship had 8 VLASROC rounds and 6 Mark 32 torpedoes, against 8 UUVs at ranges that varied. With thermal layering and acoustic conditions, the math had been previously established. Acoustic sea state in the Persian Gulf in January at 1:47 a.m. was moderate. Better than the Arctic engagement, worse than open ocean optimal. Hit probability per ASROC in these conditions, approximately 55% against the shallow contacts, 35% against the deep contacts. VLASROC Cell 1 launched at 1:48 a.m. against the shallowest confirmed contact at bearing 293, range 8.1 kilometers, depth 24 meters. The rocket motor burned northwest while the gun was training to the surface contacts and the SM6 solution was being finalized. 3 fights opening simultaneously. The ASROC launch sound lost in the concurrent activity throughout the ship. The 5-inch gun opened fire at 1:49 a.m. against the lead USV cluster at 20.4 kilometers. SM6 cells 1 through 4 launched at 1:49 a.m. against 4 lead air contacts at 58 to 62 kilometers. Seahawk began its launch sequence at 1:48 a.m. for ASW positioning. 4 seconds separated the first ASROC, the first gun round, and the first SM6, simultaneous offensive action, across 3 domains from a single ship. Running count, 1:49 a.m., second 122, ASW ASROC Cell 1 in flight, surface gun firing at 20.4 kilometers cluster, air SM6 cells 1 to 4 launched, VL-ASROC 7 remaining, 5-inch 4 rounds expended, SM6 4 remaining. Air contacts, 30 at 58 kilometers. Surface, 20 at 20 kilometers. Underwater, 8 at 7.8 to 10.5 kilometers. Cost $8.4 million. Time elapsed 2 minutes. The first conflict emerged at 1:51 a.m., 4 minutes into the engagement. Not a system failure, a geometry conflict. The CIWS aft mount had been tracking the USV contacts on the surface picture in surface engagement mode. The mount had rotated to bearing 048, barrel depressed toward the waterline, tracking the lead USV cluster that the gun was also working on. The CIWS aft was the backup to the gun, positioned to engage any USV contact that got inside 1.5 kilometers before the gun could stop it. At 1:51 a.m., the air threat engagement had progressed to the point where 2 UAV contacts had survived the SM6 outer ring and the SM-2 middle ring and were now at 4.2 and 4.8 kilometers on bearing 019 inside CIWS engagement range for the air fight. The CIWS forward was tracking them in air mode. The CIWS-AF was tracking USV contacts in surface mode. Both fights needed the aft mount at the same moment. The air contacts were approaching from bearing 019. The USV contacts were approaching from bearing 048. 29 degrees of azimuth separation between two threat types, one CIWS mount, one barrel that pointed in one direction at a time. The fire control system flagged the conflict automatically. CIWS-AFT tasking conflict, air mode versus surface mode. The system required a human decision on priority because both engagement windows were time critical and neither could wait. CIWS-AF air mode. Take the UAVs. Gun handles the surface. The decision was correct in that context. The UAVs were closer to impact timing than the USVs. The gun had range and rate of fire to keep the surface contacts from reaching 1.5 kilometers before CIWS would be needed there. But the decision meant the surface contacts at 19 to 20 kilometers were now entirely dependent on the 5-inch gun with no CIWS backup until the air contacts were cleared. CIWS aft rotated 29 degrees from bearing 048 to bearing 019, depressed barrel from surface to air elevation, reacquired, burst on the first UAV contact at 3,800 meters, 0.7 seconds, 52 rounds. Fragmented. Warhead initiated in the fragmentation cloud. Flat crack, minor pressure wave, brief thermal signature on FLIR. CIWS-AF rotated to acquire the second UAV contact at 4,200 meters. Burst 0.8 seconds, 60 rounds. Fragmented. Warhead initiation confirmed. Air contacts cleared in the aft CIWS zone. CIWS aft rotated back to bearing 048 for surface mode. In the 93 seconds that CIWS aft had been in air mode, the lead USV cluster had closed from 20 to 18.8 kilometers. The gun had fired 14 rounds at the cluster in those 93 seconds and had disabled 2 contacts. 12 USV contacts remained on bearing 042 to 055, now at 17 to 21 kilometers. Running count, 1:53 a.m., second 356. Air SM-64 expended, 4 intercepts. SM-2, 8 expended, 6 intercepts. 22 air contacts at 38 to 44 kilometers. Surface, gun 21 rounds. 3 USVs disabled. 17 remaining at 17 to 21 kilometers. Underwater, ASROC 1 fired, no result yet. 7 contacts at 6.8 to 10.1 kilometers. CIWS aft, returning to surface mode after air conflict. SM-6 4, SM-2 16, ESSM 32, VL-ASROC 7, Mark 32 6. Cost $19.0 million. Time, 6 minutes. The ASROC result came in at 1:53 a.m. Contact at bearing 293, depth 24 meters. The Mark 54 had acquired and neutralized it. 1 UUV down, 7 remaining. VL-ASROC cells, 2 and 3 against 2 more shallow contacts at bearings 296 and 301, ranges 8.8 and 9.3 kilometers, depths 26 and 29 meters. Both launched within a 12-second window. Cell 2 result, MK-54 acquired, contact neutralized. Cell 3 result, no acquisition in the search window. The contact had descended from 29 meters to 41 meters during the 78-second ASROC flight time, below the Mark 54's optimal seeker performance depth in these acoustic conditions. Contact at bearing 301, now at 41 meters depth, continued closing. 2 UUVs neutralized, 6 remaining. 1 confirmed deep contact at 41 meters that had evaded the Mark 54. The Seahawk launched at 1:52 a.m. and was now transiting northwest toward the surface contact field. The helicopter's primary value remained the same as in previous engagements. Its AQS-22 dipping sonar could resolve the deep UUV contacts more precisely than the hull sonar, and it carried 2 Mk-54 torpedoes for precision close-range engagement. But the Seahawk was the only ASW mobile platform, and it had 2 torpedoes. Against 6 remaining UUVs, including at least 1 confirmed deep contact, 2 Mk-54s would handle 2 contacts at most. The remaining 4 would need to be managed by the hull sonar and the Mark 32 tubes. The airfight was proceeding in the middle ring. ESSM cells, 1 through 8, fired against the surviving 22 UAV contacts at 20 to 28 kilometers. 6 intercepts, 2 misses, both contacts having descended to sea-skimming altitude below 30 meters. The rapid approach geometry producing ESSM basket offsets on the low-altitude targets. 16 air contacts remaining at 15 to 24 kilometers. ESSM cells 9 through 16. 8 more, 5 intercepts, 3 misses. 11 air contacts remaining at 10 to 17 kilometers inside CIWS approach range on the forward mount. RAM cells 1 through 8 against 8 of the 11 air contacts at 7 to 10 kilometers. 6 intercepts, 2 misses. 5 air contacts inside 6 kilometers. Running count, 1:58 a.m., second 671. Air, 5 contacts at 4 to 6 kilometers. SM-6, 4 remaining, AAW reserved. SM-2, 16. ESSM, 16 remaining. RAM, 13. CIWS-4, 100% air mode. CIWS aft, surface mode. Surface at gun 68 rounds, 6 USVs disabled, 14 remaining at 12 to 18 kilometers. Underwater, 6 UUVs at 5.8 to 9.1 kilometers. ASROC, 5 remaining. Mark 32, 6. Seahawk, transiting 6 minutes to ASW position. Cost, $38.7 million. Time, 11 minutes. The second domain conflict emerged in the surface fight at 1:59 a.m. The gun had been firing steadily since 1:49 a.m. 68 rounds in 9 minutes, 6 USV contacts disabled, 2 more probable kills awaiting confirmation from the Seahawk. The gun was cycling at 18 rounds per minute, slightly below maximum rate due to a brief ammunition feed hesitation at 1:54 a.m. that had been cleared in 4 seconds. 14 contacts remaining at 12 to 18 kilometers, closing at 29 knots. At 1:59 a.m., the lead USV subgroup of 4 contacts reached 12 kilometers, the range at which the ship's standing orders for live fire engagement of small surface contacts required positive visual confirmation before continued engagement. At night, at 12 kilometers, visual confirmation was only possible via FLIR or via helicopter observation. The FLIR camera was mounted on the mast. It could provide thermal imagery of the surface contacts, but in the current engagement, the flare operator was the same person managing the ASW thermal picture for the UUV contacts. The operator was switching between the air/surface FLIR and the underwater thermal monitoring simultaneously. It was not a rules of engagement problem. All 20 USV contacts had been confirmed hostile from their launch trajectory, radar profile, and approach bearing consistent with the coordinated multi-domain launch. But the physical limitation of one FLIR operator monitoring 2 thermal pictures at close range for 2 simultaneous fights created a momentary gap. The FLIR was pointed at the USV contacts and the UUV picture on the hull sonar lost its FLIR correlation support for 23 seconds. 23 seconds. The deep UUV contact at 41 meters descended to 49 meters in those 23 seconds, and its track quality on the hull, sonar degraded from amber to red. When the FLIR operator returned attention to the sonar picture, the deep contact had moved 66 meters, and the track file had to be rebuilt from the last firm position. The gun continued firing during those 23 seconds. 4 contacts disabled at 11 to 12 kilometers. The VLASROC operator used those 23 seconds to fire Cell 4 against the contact at bearing 305, range 8.4 kilometers, depth 31 meters. The next shallowest confirmed UUV. The Mark 54 acquired after 19 seconds of search. Contact neutralized, 5 remaining. Running count, 2:02 a.m., second, 919. Air, 4 contacts at 2.8 to 4.2 kilometers, CIWS forward engaging. Surface, 10 USV contacts at 7 to 14 kilometers. Gun, 97 rounds expended. 4 more disabled this phase. Underwater, 5 UUVs at 4.8 to 8.5 kilometers. Deep contact at 49 meters, track quality red. ASROC, 4 remaining. Mark 32, 6. Seahawk, 2 minutes to first drop position. SM6, 4 held. SM2, 16. ESSM 16. RAM 13. Cost $48.5 million. Time 15 minutes. CIWS forward completed the airfight engagement. 4 contacts at 2.8 to 4.2 kilometers. The surviving UAVs that had penetrated through ESSM and RAM. Burst on the first at 3,600 meters. Fragmented. Warhead initiated at 3,200 meters. The overpressure and fragment cloud reached the hull as a sharp, brief impact, the sound reaching the bridge as a compressed crack across the water. No structural effect at this range. CIWS forward reacquired. Second contact at 3,900 meters. Fragmented. Warhead did not initiate. Structural disintegration without fuse trigger. Third contact. Fragmented at 2,800 meters. Warhead initiated. Debris scattered across a 90-meter radius. 4 fragments reached the forward hull above the waterline. Cosmetic, non-structural. Fourth contact. The last surviving UAV had descended to 18 meters altitude, the CIWS radar experiencing the same sea clutter ambiguity that had affected previous low-altitude engagements. 2 bursts required, first burst insufficient, second burst at 1,900 meters achieved fragmentation. Warhead did not initiate. Airfight complete. 30 contacts launched, 30 neutralized. CIWS forward, 87% ammunition remaining. The airfight was over at 2:04 a.m. The surface fight and the underwater fight were still very much active. Running count, 2:04 a.m., second 1,041. Air threat, 30 contacts, 30 neutralized. CIWS forward, 87%. Forward hull, 4 fragment impacts, non-structural. Surface, 9 USV contacts at 5 to 11 kilometers. Gun still engaging. Underwater, 5 UUVs at 4.1 to 7.8 kilometers. 1 deep contact at 49 meters unresolved. ASROC, 4 remaining. Mark 32, 6. SM6, 4 loaded, no applicable threat. SM2, 16 loaded, no applicable threat. ESSM, 16 loaded, no applicable threat. Cost $54.1 million. Time, 17 minutes. With the airfight resolved, the TAO redirected CIWS forward to surface mode, adding a second mount to the surface engagement. CIWS forward rotated to bearing 046, barrel depressed to near horizontal. With both CIWS mounts now available for surface engagement, the close-range defense against the USVs improved substantially. The gun was at 107 rounds expended, 493 remaining, still cycling at 18 rounds per minute against the USV contacts at 5 to 11 kilometers. 9 contacts remaining. The Seahawk was reporting positions on the lead 3 contacts at 5.2 kilometers. The helicopter had arrived above the contact field and was relaying targeting data. CIWS forward acquired the nearest USV at 4,800 meters. First burst in the surface mode. The contact was at the surface, making 29 knots, and the CIWS tracking radar had to discriminate between the contact's hull and wave returns. At 4,800 meters in moderate sea state, the discrimination was adequate. Burst, 0.8 seconds, 60 rounds. Contact stopped at 4,400 meters. CIWS forward reacquired the next contact. Burst, 0.6 seconds, 45 rounds. Contact stopped. CIWS aft. Took 3 contacts on the southern side of the approach arc. 3 bursts, 3 contacts stopped. 4 contacts disabled in 80 seconds by combined CIWS engagement. The gun covered the remaining contacts at longer range as they attempted to maintain approach speed. 3 more disabled at 6 to 9 kilometers in the next 4 minutes. Final 2 USV contacts reached 2.1 and 2.6 kilometers before CIWS forward and aft engaged them in sequence. Both stopped inside 1.8 kilometers. Neither warhead initiated. Surface fight complete at 2:09 a.m. 20 contacts launched. 20 disabled or stopped. CIWS combined, 82% average ammunition remaining. The underwater fight was the last active domain. 5 remaining UUV contacts at 2.8 to 6.4 kilometers. 1 confirmed deep contact with degraded track quality. The Seahawk had repositioned from the surface contact field to the ASW sector at 2:05 a.m. Its dipping sonar resolved the deep contact at 52 meters, the track file that the hull sonar had lost quality on during the 23-second FLIR conflict. Seahawk drop on the deep contact at 2:07 a.m., first Mark 54 from the helicopter. The deeper water acoustic conditions in the Persian Gulf at this depth were challenging, but within the Mark 54's operational parameters. Acquisition in 28 seconds. Contact neutralized. 4 remaining. VLASROC cells 5 and 6 against 2 shallow contacts at 3.8 and 4.1 kilometers, depths 27 and 31 meters. Both acquired, both neutralized, 2 remaining at 2.9 and 3.1 kilometers. MK-32 Port 21 against the contact at 2.9 kilometers, depth 24 meters, acquisition in 3 minutes, 8 seconds, contact neutralized. The final UUV contact was at 2.6 kilometers, depth 19 meters, inside the MK-32's optimal short-range engagement geometry. MK-32 starboard tube 1. Acquisition in 2 minutes, 41 seconds. Contact neutralized. At 2:14 a.m., the AN/SQS-53C and the Seahawk's dipping sonar both confirmed no active contacts within 5 kilometers. The underwater fight was complete. All 3 engagements were over at 2:14 a.m. Total engagement duration from first air contact detection to final UUV intercept, 27 minutes. Running count, 2:14 a.m., second 1,607, all 3 domains clear. Air, 30 contacts, 30 neutralized. Surface, 20 contacts, 20 neutralized. Underwater, 8 contacts, 8 neutralized. Total, 58 contacts. SM-6, 4 remaining, not used, no applicable threat. SM-2, 16 remaining, not used. ESSM, 16 remaining. RAM, 13 remaining. VL-ASROC, 2 remaining. Mark 32, 4 remaining. CIWS 4, 87%. Aft, 82%. Gun, 141 rounds expended. Hull, 4 fragment impacts, non-structural. No injuries. Cost, $59.3 million. Time, 27 minutes. Running count, 2:14 a.m., second 1,607. All 3 domains cleared. Air 30/30. Surface 2020. UUV 8/8. SM6 4 remaining, unused. SM2 16 remaining, unused. ESSM 16. RAM 13. VL-ASROC 2. Mark 32 4. CIWS 4 87%, aft 82%. Gun 141 rounds expended. 4 fragment impacts forward hull, non-structural. 0 injuries. Cost, $49.7 million. Time, 27 minutes. The damage assessment completed at 3:15 a.m. 4 fragment impacts from UAV warhead detonations on the forward hull above the waterline. Largest penetration was a 15-millimeter fragment through a hull access panel above the waterline, non-structural, above the waterline deck, no flooding risk. 3 smaller impacts on the hull plating, surface damage only. No electronic damage, no propulsion effects, no personnel injuries, all systems fully operational. The magazine assessment read at 3:17 a.m. produced the inventory picture that the watch team had been tracking throughout, now stated in final form. SM6, 4 of 8 remaining. SM2, 16 of 24 remaining. ESSM, 16 of 32 remaining. RAM, 13 of 21 remaining. VLASROC, 2 of 8 remaining. MK32, MK54, 4 of 6 remaining. CIWS forward, 87%. CIWS aft, 82%. 5-inch gun, 459 rounds of 600 remaining. The observation that defined the magazine picture was the one that had been visible throughout the engagement, but was clearest in this final accounting. 4 SM6 cells and 16 SM2 cells were fully loaded, completely unused. Not because they had been held in reserve, they had been available throughout, but because the threats against which they were designed and built had been on the water and under the water rather than the air. The ship had arrived at its most critical air defense engagement with half its SM6 and all its SM2 available, and had used none of them because the air fight had been 30 Shade 136 UAVs rather than YJ-18 cruise missiles. The expensive inventory was intact. The cheap inventory had done the work. The ASW magazine was the one that felt the pressure. 6 VLASROC fired, 4 used effectively, 2 missed. 2 Mark 54 from the Seahawk, both used. 2 Mark 32, Mark 54, both used. 10 of 16 ASW rounds expended against 8 contacts. Hit rate, 80%, which was above the expected 55% in these conditions, and reflected the thermal layer advantages of the shallow contacts in the January Gulf acoustic environment. The supply officer assembled the final accounting at 5 a.m. 30 Shade 136 one-way attack platforms at $20,000, $600,000. 20 rigid hull unmanned surface vehicles at $60,000 average, $1.2 million. 8 autonomous underwater vehicles at $100,000 each, $800,000. Coordination and launch logistics for 3 simultaneous domain launches, $200,000. Total adversary investment, approximately $2.8 million. U.S. munitions expended. 4 SM6 at $2.1 million to $8.4 million. 8 SM2 at $1.2 million to $9.6 million. 16 ESSM at $450,000 to $7.2 million. 8 RAM at $900,000 to $7.2 million. CIWS ammunition, $42,000. 5-inch gun, 141 rounds at $1,800 to $253,800. 6 VLASROC at 1 point $0.5 million to $6.3 million. Two Mk-54 SH-60R at $180,000 to $360,000. Two Mk-32 Mk-54 at $180,000 to $360,000. Total, $49.7 million. Exchange ratio, 18-to-1 in the adversary's favor. The ratio was the third lowest in this analysis series. After the GPS-jammed engagement and the decoy plus Y J-18 operation. But the exchange ratio captured less of the strategic picture than in any other engagement analyzed. The relevant metric here was not the cost ratio between two sides. It was the administrative complexity that $2.8 million had imposed on a $2.2 billion warship. The CIWS aft-tasking conflict at 1:51 a.m., surface mode for USVs, air mode needed for UAVs. Decision in under 2 seconds. Correct call, but surface contacts closed 1.2 extra kilometers during the transition. Could have been 2.4 if the air contacts had been slightly further out. The FLIR operator conflict at 1:59 a.m. One operator, 2 thermal pictures. 23 seconds of UUV track gap. Deep contact descended 8 meters unobserved. If the deep contact had reached the hull during that 23 seconds, the first indication would have been a detonation. Both conflicts resolved, both manageable, both created by the same condition. 1 ship, 3 fights, finite human attention. The adversary had not needed to overwhelm any single system. They had needed every system fully loaded simultaneously, generating human attention conflicts that, resolved differently, could have produced a hull impact in any of the 3 domains. For $2.8 million, the adversary had conducted the most cognitively expensive engagement in the ship's deployment history. The crew had succeeded by executing correctly under conditions the system had not been specifically designed for. The margin of success, examined contact by contact and decision by decision, was thinner than any of the individual domain engagements in isolation would have been. Emergency resupply transmitted at 4:22 a.m. VL-ASROC priority. SM6 and ESSM secondary. ETA 3 days. The adversary had learned the simultaneous domain engagement worked at the cognitive level, even when it did not work at the weapons level. The next iteration would not need to be more sophisticated. It needed to be larger. 30 UAVs, 20 USVs, 8 UUVs. If the next iteration was 40, 30, and 12, the conflicts would multiply and the margins would contract. The math that had held at the numbers used in this engagement might not hold at the scaled version of it. At $2.8 million per engagement, the adversary could afford to run the experiment until it found the scale where the margins ran out.